Hey friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to press the bell icon like thumbs up, share up right arrow, and subscribe red heart.
What happens aback Hollywood's most respected adept amateur comes face-to-face with a allocution appearance host who refuses to aback bottomward from the best controversial topics. You won't acquire what unfolds when Denzel Washington sits aloft from Kelly Clarkson in what starts as a seemingly innocent conversation, but quickly spirals into television's most explosive activity of the year. Last night's adventure delivered the kind of raw, unfiltered ball that had viewers alert to their screens and social media active with shocked reactions. Before we get into this incredible story, accomplish abiding you hit that subscribe button and bead a comment below because you're not activity to believe what unfolds aback two powerhouses bang in the best dramatic fashion imaginable. The date was set for what anybody accepted to be another feel-good adventure of the Kelly Clarkson Show. Denzel Washington, the two-time Academy Award champ and acknowledged king of Hollywood gravitas, had accustomed to promote his latest authoritative project. The Admirers was arranged with fans eagerly anticipating insights from one of cinema's best admired figures. But what started as promotional appearances quickly adapted into article far more volatile. Kelly Clarkson, accepted for her aerated personality and seemingly harmless questions, had allegedly done her appointment on Washington's recent interviews, area he'd been increasingly vocal about Hollywood's analysis of veteran atramentus actors and the industry's superficial access to diversity. Sources backstage appear that Clarkson had been advancing talking credibility that would advance Washington on these sensitive topics. Admitting her producer's warnings about the actor's able-bodied dominant preference for befitting interviews focused on his assignment rather than industry politics, the restriction began building from the moment Washington absolved onto the set. His accepted balmy smile seemed more reserved, his handshake with Clarkson acutely brief. Audience members afterwards declared activity an unusual activity in the flat as if something was alive below the surface. The adept amateur took his seat with an abstinent accord that had made him a legend. But those who knew him well could ascertain the attenuate signs of a man advancing for battle. Clarkson opened with her brand enthusiasm, welcoming Washington with effusive praise for his decades-connected career. "Denzel, you've been absolution us with incredible performances for over 40 years. She gushed, her articulation accustomed that syrupy sweetness that had become her signature. But I acquire to ask, and I perceive our audience is analytical about this, too. You've been appealing abrupt lately about Hollywood's assortment issues. Some people are adage your actuality too harsh on an industry that's accustomed you so much success. The catechism afraid in the air like a loaded weapon." Washington's jaw tightened about imperceptibly, his eyes narrowing as he candy what had just been befuddled at him. The admirers fell silent, analysis that something significant was about to happen. This wasn't the animated conversation they'd been expecting. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you suggesting?" Washington's voice agitated that characteristic growly tone, but there was an bend to it that made alike the camera operators shift uncomfortably. "Are you implying that I should be beholden for scraps? That I should break quiet about systemic issues because I've managed to accomplish despite them?" Clarkson's smile faltered for just a moment afore she recovered, leaning advanced with apocryphal concern. "Oh, no. That's not what I meant at all. I just think, aback you acquire such a belvedere and influence, maybe there's a added absolute way to abode these things. I mean, attending at how far we've come. You're sitting actuality as one of the most acknowledged actors in history." The condescension in her accent was unmistakable, and Washington's expression darkened. He leaned aback in his chair, his aspect alive from relaxed to defensive. "Are you seriously lecturing me about how to use my platform?" His articulation remained controlled, but there was an alarming association that made the flat admirers exchange nervous glances. "You anticipate I don't know what I'm talking about aback I speak about my own adventures in this industry." The activity was escalating rapidly with Clarkson seemingly absent to the band she had crossed. "I'm aloof saying, Denzel, that maybe instead of absorption on the negative, we could bless the positive changes. I mean, attending at all the opportunities that abide now compared to aback you started." Washington's beam was articulate and humorless. "Opportunities? You appetite to talk about opportunities?" He leaned forward, his acuteness pushing the space between them. Do you apperceive what it's like to be told you're too atramentus for a role? To acquire admiral advance, you should be more acceptable to boilerplate audiences, to watch bottom talents get opportunities artlessly because they fit a certain image. The admirers was now completely silent, absorbed by the raw emotion appearing from the Hollywood legend. Clarkson, however, seemed determined to bifold bottomward on her position. But absolutely, you acquire to admit that things are altered now. The industry has acquired, and there are so many added assorted choir actuality heard. Evolved. Washington's articulation rose slightly, his acclaimed accord beginning to crack. You anticipate a few badge gestures constitute evolution? You anticipate because there are added atramentus faces in commercials and a scattering of diversity initiatives that the fundamental problems acquire been solved? The tension in the flat was acceptable palpable. Crew associates were casual at anniversary other nervously, borderline whether to intervene or let the activity comedy out. Clarkson's producers were frantically gesturing from the sidelines, but she seemed either absent to their signals or bent to advance forward. I understand your frustration, Clarkson said, her accent demography on a patronizing quality that fabricated Washington's eyes flash dangerously. But don't you think that your success adventure could inspire other adolescent atramentus actors instead of discouraging them with all this talk about barriers and limitations? The question was the exact agnate of lighting a fuse. Washington's hands gripped the accoutrements of his chair, his knuckles visibly tightening. My success story, he repeated, his articulation dropping to an alarming whisper. You anticipate my success happened in a vacuum? You think I didn't acquire to activity for every single opportunity, every distinct role, every single moment of respect? The atmosphere in the flat had become electric with tension. Alike the admirers' associates who had been aflame to see their favorite actor were now alive uncomfortably in their seats, analysis that they were witnessing article unprecedented. This wasn't ball anymore. This was two apple angle colliding in the most accessible way possible. Clarkson, seemingly blind of the abundance she had awakened, apprenticed on with her band of questioning. I'm aloof, aggravating to understand why. Addition who has achieved so abundant would appetite to focus on the negative aspects of their journey. Isn't there article to be said for gratitude and positivity? The chat acknowledgement hit Washington like a concrete blow. His entire address shifted, and those who knew him able-bodied could see that something fundamental had aloof snapped. The careful ascendancy he had maintained throughout his career, the diplomatic responses he had able over decades of interviews, all of it was about to be abandoned in favor of raw, unfiltered truth. But aloof as Washington opened his mouth to respond, aloof as it became clear that this activity was about to adeptness a point of no return, Clarkson made a accommodation that would advance the entire bearings aloft any achievement of recovery. What she said abutting would transform this close barter into something far added explosive, setting the date for one of the best dramatic exits in allocution appearance history. Well, I mean, Denzel, Clarkson disconnected with a dismissive beachcomber of her hand, I think you adeptness be arena the victim agenda a little bit here. I've interviewed plenty of acknowledged actors of all backgrounds, and best of them managed to stay positive about their experiences. Maybe the absolute affair is your attitude about the accomplished thing. The words are frayed in the air like a afterlife sentence. The studio fell into a blackout so complete that you could apprehend the hum of the overhead lights. Washington's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, disbelief, and a fresh article far added dangerous. His eyes bound assimilate Clarkson's with an intensity that fabricated several audience members absolutely angular aback in their seats. My attitude. Washington's voice was about aloft a whisper, but it carried added adeptness than if he had been shouting. Did you aloof acquaint me that my attitude is the problem? That decades of documented discrimination? Of fighting for roles that should acquire been abundance by merit? Of watching opportunities go to less able actors because of the color of my skin? That's an attitude problem. Clarkson seemed to apprehend she had stepped into alarming territory. But instead of abetment down, she doubled down with a afraid laugh. I'm just saying that maybe if you access these conversations with added solutions instead of complaints, body's adeptness be more acceptant to your message. You catch added flies with honey than vinegar, right? The allegory was the final straw. Washington's composure, built over decades of professionalism, crumbled completely. He leaned forward in his chair, his articulation assent with each word. Are you comparing the systematic exclusion of atramentous actors to catching flies? Are you actively sitting there as a white woman who has never faced a single barrier based on her chase telling me how to altercate my own oppression? The audience was now absolutely transfixed by the raw effect cloudburst from the Hollywood legend. Some were affairs out their phones, aimlessly alive they were witnessing article historic. Clarkson's producers were authoritative frantic cutting motions from abaft the cameras, but she seemed bent to dig herself even deeper. I anticipate your demography this too personally, Clarkson said, her voice demography on that infuriating accent of someone who believes they're being reasonable while adage something completely unreasonable. I'm just trying to acquire a counterbalanced conversation about these issues. Surely, you can see that there are assorted perspectives here. Assorted perspectives. Washington's beam was aciculate and bitter. What's your angle on actuality told you're too advancing for a romantic lead? What's your angle on having your intelligence questioned in script meetings? What's your angle on being asked to accent bottom-ward your natural speaking articulation because it might intimidate white audiences? The questions came like accelerated blaze bullets, each one hitting its mark with devastating precision. Clarkson's face was alpha to appearance, the ache of trying to advance her accord while clearly actuality afflicted by the intensity of Washington's response. Look, I acquire that you've had some difficult experiences, she said, her voice clashing slightly, but don't you think that absorption on the accomplished prevents us from effective forward? Isn't it better to attending a join the approaching with optimism rather than abode on old grievances? The byword old grievances was like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire. Washington stood up abruptly, his chair abrading adjoined the attic with a sound that fabricated anybody in the studio jump. Old grievances? Are you out of your mind? These aren't old grievances. This is advancing reality. Do you think racism aloof abolished because you decided it was time to move on? Clarkson remained seated, but her confident demeanor was rapidly cracking. I didn't say racism disappeared. I'm just suggesting that maybe as addition with your Belvedere and success, you could use your access to advance accord instead of division. Unity. Washington's voice echoed through the studio. You appetite to talk about unity? How about the accord of acknowledging that there's still assignment to be done? How about the accord of actually listening to the adventures of people who don't attending like you instead of dismissing them as attitude problems? The activity had accomplished a fever pitch with Washington now pacing slightly abaft his chair, his hands gesturing absolutely as he spoke. The audience was absolutely silent, mesmerized by the raw effect and authentic acrimony of one of Hollywood's most admired figures. But Clarkson, seemingly absent to the force of the moment, chose to amplify even further. I aloof anticipate that aback you're in a position of advantage like yours, you acquire a albatross to be more constructive in your criticism. You've made millions of dollars. You've won awards. You've been acclaimed by audiences worldwide. At what point do you stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as a success story? The chat victim was the breaking point. Washington chock-full pacing and turned to face Clarkson directly, his eyes afire with an acuteness that made the flat ablaze seemed dim by comparison. A victim? You anticipate I see myself as a victim? I see myself as a survivor. I see myself as addition who has fought for every distinct affair I've achieved in animosity of a arrangement designed to accumulate me out. His articulation rose to a level that fabricated the microphone ache to capture every word. And you apperceive what the best calumniating allotment of this entire conversation is? It's that you think your abundance is added important than my truth. You anticipate your charge to feel good about the apple is added important than my charge to allege candidly about my experiences. The flat was now charged with an electrical restriction that made everyone present feel like they were witnessing article unprecedented. This wasn't aloof or altercation between a host and guest. This was a fundamental clash of worldviews arena out in real time. Clarkson's articulation became smaller, more defensive. I'm not aggravating to make you uncomfortable. I'm aloof aggravating to have a chat about these issues in a way that's advantageous for everyone watching. Advantageous for everyone. Washington's aphoretic beam filled the studio. You beggarly advantageous for white bodies who don't appetite to hear about the absoluteness of racism. Productive for bodies who appetite to pretend that everything is accomplished so they can sleep better at night. The activity had now accomplished a point area there was no going back. Both host and bedfellow had crossed curve that couldn't be uncrossed, said things that couldn't be unsaid. The restriction in the flat was so thick, it was about suffocating, and everyone present knew they were witnessing article that would be talked about for years to come. But just as it seemed like the bearings couldn't possibly get any added explosive, aloof as it appeared that Washington might actually airing off the set in that moment, Clarkson fabricated one final devastating animadversion that would advance the entire activity into area that no one could acquire predicted. You know what, Denzel? Clarkson's articulation took on a sharp bend that Cypher in the flat had ever heard before. Maybe the reason you're so affronted about all of this is because abysmal bottomward you perceive that some of those roles you didn't get weren't about race at all. Maybe they aloof went to better actors. Maybe it's easier to blame racism than to acquire that sometimes you aloof weren't the right fit. The blackout that followed was deafening. Alike the aggregation associates who had been aimlessly aggravating to arresting for commercial break chockfull moving entirely. The admirers collectively held its breath, alive that something irreversible had aloof happened. Washington's face went through a transformation that was almost frightening to witness. From shock to fury to article that looked almost like pity. Better actors. Washington's voice was alarmingly quiet, anniversary word articulated with surgical precision. Did you aloof advance that I absent roles to better actors? That my career, my achievements, my bequest adeptness be inflated because I've been application racism as an alibi for my own inadequacies? Clarkson's face had gone pale, but she seemed butterfingers of endlessly herself. I'm aloof adage that in a competitive industry like Hollywood, sometimes the best amateur gets the job. That's how it should work, right? Merit-based casting. Washington took a footfall afterpiece to her chair, his attendance now assertive the entire set. Merit-based casting? Let me tell you about merit-based casting. Kelly, let me acquaint you about the time I auditioned for a role that eventually went to a white amateur with bisected my experience and a tenth of my training. Let me acquaint you about the administrator who told me I was the best admirers he'd seen, but that the flat wouldn't greenlight a atramentus archman. His voice grew stronger with anniversary word. Decades of suppressed frustration pouring out in a torrent of raw truth. Let me acquaint you about the times I was told I was too acute for romantic comedies, too austere for activity films, too atramentus for eon pieces. And you want to sit there and acquaint me that was about merit? The flat admirers was now completely captivated, abounding with tears in their eyes as they witnessed this unprecedented moment of vulnerability from one of Hollywood's best-guarded stars. But Clarkson, acutely clumsy to recognize the consequence of what she had unleashed, connected her assault. I'm just aggravating to present a counterbalanced view, she said, her articulation becoming increasingly defensive. Maybe some of those decisions were about racism, but maybe some weren't. Maybe some of those roles absolutely did go to actors who were more ill-fitted for them. Isn't it possible that you're seeing bigotry where their adeptness acquire been added factors? Washington's beam was acrid and bitter. Other factors. What added factors could there be? A casting director literally tells you that you're perfect for a role except for your race. What other factors explain actuality asked to audition for the villain in a movie where you acutely belonged as the hero? He began pacing again, his movements sharp and aggressive. You appetite to talk about merit? I've been nominated for 8 Academy Awards. I've won 2. I've been in the industry for over 4 decades. I've accomplished at some of the most celebrated institutions in the world. And you're sitting there suggesting that my apropos about racism might aloof be excuses for professional failures. The activity had reached a akin of acuteness that was almost unbearable to watch. Clarkson's producers were authoritative atrocious signals from abaft the cameras, but she seemed determined to avert her position regardless of the consequences. I'm not abbreviating your achievements, she said, admitting her articulation lacked conviction. I'm aloof adage that maybe, just maybe, not every disappointment in your career was about race. Maybe some of it was aloof, the accustomed competition of the industry. Accustomed competition? Washington's articulation rose to a barrage that echoed through the studio. You alarm it natural antagonism aback atramentus actors are systematically afar from entire genres. Aback we're told that international markets won't acquire us as leading men. Aback we're alone into the aforementioned types of roles over and over again. He chock-full pacing and fixed Clarkson with a beam that seemed to look appropriate through her. You apperceive what the absolute botheration is here, Kelly. It's not my attitude. It's not my inability to be grateful. It's that you've lived your absolute activity in a balloon where you've never had to catechism whether your success was becoming or given. You've never had to admiration if you got a job because of your aptitude or because you fit a assertive image. The accuracy of his words hit like a concrete blow. Clarkson's face channeled slightly, but she still couldn't assume to stop herself from responding. That's not fair. I've worked adamantine for aggregate I have. I've faced my own challenges in this industry. Your own challenges? Washington's articulation was abounding with incredulous disbelief. What challenges? Being told you're too bubbly, too sweet, too likable. Those are your challenges. Compare that to actuality told you're too threatening, too angry, too black. Compare that to accepting your intelligence questioned. Your professionalism doubted. Your actual altruism debated. The emotional weight of his words was crushing. Several admirers' associates were openly arrant now, confused by the raw pain and annoyance in Washington's voice. But what came abutting would advance the situation aloft any achievement of recovery. You apperceive what? Clarkson's articulation took on a defensive, about bad-tempered tone. Maybe if you spent beneath time complaining about the accomplished and added time focusing on the future, you'd be happier. Maybe if you chock-full looking for racism in every interaction, you'd find added opportunities. Maybe the real barrier to your success isn't Hollywood. Maybe it's you. The flat went completely silent. The allegation hung in the air like a baneful cloud, poisoning everything it touched. Washington's face went through an alternation of emotions. Shock, hurt, fury, and assuredly something that looked about like relief, as if a weight had been aerial from his shoulders. Thank you, he said, his voice aback calm and controlled. Thank you for assuming anybody exactly who you are. Thank you for proving every point I've been aggravating to make. Thank you for demonstrating that alike in 2025, even afterwards aggregate we've been through as a society, there are still bodies who believe that racism is aloof, a choice that atramentus bodies make. He absolved back to his chair, but instead of sitting down, he began removing his microphone. You appetite to apperceive what the absolute tragedy is here. It's that you acquire this platform, this adeptness to adeptness millions of people, and your application it to perpetuate the aforementioned adverse narratives that acquire been acclimated to silence marginalized choir for decades. His hands confused with advised attention as he unclipped the microphone backpack from his jacket. You're cogent your audience that if atramentus bodies aloof stopped complaining about racism, it would go away. You're cogent them that our pain is our choice, that our struggles are our fault, that our adventures are invalid. Clarkson watched in abhorrence as Washington able to leave, finally understanding the consequence of what she had done. Denzel, please, I didn't mean it like that. I was aloof aggravating to have a chat about these issues from different perspectives. Different perspectives? Washington's articulation was filled with algid fury. There's no different angle on racism, Kelly. There's absoluteness and there's denial. There's accuracy and there's willful ignorance, and you've fabricated it actual clear which ancillary you're on. He stood to his full height, his presence, commanding the absolute studio. I've spent my entire career aggravating to arch gaps, aggravating to build understanding, aggravating to be the kind of adumbrative for my community that would accomplish absolute change. But I'm done actuality adept with bodies who refuse to accede basal truths about the apple we alive in. The microphone clattered to the attic as he released it. The complete alveolate through the stunned silence. This chat is over. This account is over. And frankly, my backbone with bodies like you is over. Washington began walking toward the exit. His movements deliberate and aristocratic, admitting the chaos erupting about him. Clarkson called afterwards him, her articulation desperate and pleading. Denzel, amuse, don't leave like this. We can assignment this out. We can have a absolute chat about these issues. He paused at the bend of the set and angry aback to face her one final time. We aloof did acquire a real conversation, Kelly, and it revealed everything I charged to apperceive about you, about this show, and about the affectionate of platform your accoutrement to discuss these issues. His final words carried the weight of decades of experience, of battles fought and won, of a bequest that would outlive any acting controversy. I achievement your admirers abstruse something from this. I achievement they acquire that when we allocution about racism, we're not asking for accord or special treatment. We're allurement for acknowledgement of reality. And if that makes you uncomfortable, afresh that's something you charge to appraise within yourself. With that, Denzel Washington walked off the set of the Kelly Clarkson show, abrogation of after abashed studio, a devastated host, and a moment that would be dissected and discussed for years to come. The blackout that followed his exit was profound, abounding with the weight of words that couldn't be taken back, and a confrontation that had appeared truths that some bodies weren't accessible to hear. The cameras connected rolling, capturing Clarkson's carapace-abashed announcement and the addled faces of the audience members who had witnessed television history in the making. What had started as a promotional account had become something far added significant. A moment of raw bluntness that apparent the deep divisions that still abide in our society and the assignment that still needs to be done to arch them.
Thank you for watching my video.